This is the Investors Channel. As always, this is your host here, Prince Dykes. I have a very, very special guest here with me here today. James here has worked on Wall Street, as you guys can see, for over 40 years, and we're here live on Wall Street. So we have some very good information. As always, I don't have a lot of time. I definitely know you guys don't have a lot of time, so we're going to get straight into it. Current state of the economy and the possible collapse that we could be facing. What do you have to say about that, James?
Okay, I think we're in a transitory period. It's like if you look at the 1970s going into the 1980s, I think if any of you are old enough to remember that or you do your homework, you can see how in the 1970s was riddled with hyperinflation, high interest rates, and as we moved into the 1980s, that inflation was wrung out of the economy. And then a new sort of economic boom took over after that. Right now, we're it's similar, not the same. We have what I would call the Keynesian black hole, where the government is printing money like crazy and borrowing money to do things like crazy and taxing people like crazy to pay for that borrowing. Yet it's having little effect on job creation, business growth, just the economy in general. And sure, there's big earnings from a small group of select companies, but generally nobody's really making any money. And the regular guys like you and me, we probably haven't seen a pay raise in 15 years. What I foresee happening is that probably around the time we get a new administration comes in, there's going to be a change in this, because this borrow and spend thing, politicians always go to that, but it doesn't really work. You get a lot of misallocation of assets. When President Obama first got in office, he talked about shovel-ready projects. Well, it sounds great, but it's not so easy to turn on the faucet and spend the money and get it spent in the right place and hire up the right people. It doesn't really work that way. It doesn't convert in real life.
And one of the things that I was noticing that you said was that, we had a lot of stimulus packages that came along.
Lots.
We had lots of stimulus packages that came along, and what you were saying that we're pumping so much money into what we have behind us, the New York Stock Exchange, right, and we're having little effect. Right. You're saying little job creation.
Right. Well, think about it. We've had two major monster stimuluses, and which were meant for the shovel-ready projects to pave the roads and fix the bridges and do all this kind of stuff, which many years ago was a go-to thing to spur on the economy. Since the 1970s, there's been a lot of question over whether that really works or not anyway. But let's face it, I live in northern New Jersey. The roads are not paved, the bridges are falling down, and they're desperate for money to fix all this stuff. So what did they do with all the stimulus money? Well, it was like misallocated. It just didn't really get where it had to go, and that's often what happens with these sort of centralized government-directed plans. Now, what I see is going to come around is, first of all, we've built up massive debt. We have very high taxes, so there's no place to go anymore. We're not creating jobs to build the tax base. We're importing a lot of new people into the country. There's a lot of negatives to put pressure on the current resources. So whoever comes in next is probably going to have to realign a lot of things and rechange priorities. What I can talk about, if I can look at past history in the 1970s going into the 80s, when Ronald Reagan was elected, he appointed a guy named Paul Volcker, and Paul Volcker was the new chairman of the Fed at the time. And the first thing he did was he went on TV smoking a big cigar and basically said, the party's over, we're not going to print money anymore, and hammered the brakes on everything. And it was like a city bus hitting a parked car. It was like we had about 2 hard years in the beginning of the 80s where it wrung out all this excess inflation, all the excess spending, all the misallocation of resources. A lot of companies went bankrupt. There was a lot of layoffs. There was a lot of issues. But then in 82, all of a sudden it kicked on to this huge economic boom where jobs were created at the rate they've never been created before or since.
And I was saying, just to piggyback what you're saying, we always say history will happen again. So right now you're saying, hey, we're in this dark, we probably stimulus package money up, to get the economy back up. It's not really working.
It didn't really work. It got close. And what I'm saying, and this is not pointing fingers and blaming and saying this one's better than that. I'm just talking about what was done, maybe why it was done, and what was expected results and what were the results. Let's face it, we're really not generating a lot of jobs. The politicians can pat themselves in the back all they want. We all know the economy's not that great. It's not terrible, but it's not really that good. And
especially for the money that we put in.
Right. And like, have you go grocery shopping? I mean, bacon is $8 a pound. It's like I just printed 25 pages of a sort of like a flip book to do something. To print 25 pages was $16. Like in color printing. Like these things, like this is crazy expensive for something that's really nothing. So, I mean, the regular Joe on the street who hasn't gotten a raise in 10 years, when he goes to the supermarket, it's like you're not buying bacon anymore because it costs way too much. Like there's just a lot of things you can't do. So I think what's happened is this has gone as far as it's going to go. We had a group of people come into Washington. They said, we're going to grow the government. The government's going to spend a lot of money, and that's going to fix the economy. I personally know from my history and the way I look at things, that never works. It always gets tried, but it never works. Because the people who come into office always say, well, we know better than the other guys. We'll learn from their mistakes and we'll fix it. It's different this time. That's what we always say on Wall Street. It's different this time. But it's never different. It's always the same mess. So now what I think is going to happen is the next person who comes in is going to have to downsize a lot of the government. Maybe they're going to privatize the TSA. Maybe they're going to sell off some government assets. Maybe they're going to change, like the government. Maybe not. Maybe they're going to give the student loans back to the banks. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of issues out there that have to be, and there's still a lot of hangover from the financial calamity of 2008. I mean, look at student loan debt. Look at all the unpaid mortgages, all the empty houses all over the country that are still, not only are they empty and have outstanding mortgages and owned by the banks, but a lot of banks don't even know who really owns the house because the titles of the property are under a cloud. Yeah, it's like weird, so you just don't know.